the subject of longevity is important at this time, but also for people who are interested in eternal matters like the matter of the human soul. We have to get used to long periods in which there seems little to happen, but in which the soul is beginning to stir within us and is beginning to express itself appropriately. It is the age in which patriarchism is beginning to emerge again. Patriarchism enabled the Bible to flourish for thousands of years, true parts of it as well as false parts of it. And with the age of the patriarchs, the coming again of the patriarchs, we're going to have the wisdom of some of the aged being able to persist so that their experiences can help guide man through the difficult days that lie ahead for this planet. One of which is the present year, which is one of hazards, one of earthquakes, one of volcanoes and tsunamis. I read yesterday that there was still tremors occurring in Concepcion in Peru from the earthquake that occurred 10 days ago or so, and which was forecast by esoteric methods as early as the 1st of January. And so we should listen to the patriarchs, even if I happen to be one of them, fast developing. Yes, and I'm going to bring some very startling information to your attention today, new information, which bears out the value of the wisdom teachings. We measure longevity in terms of the population of 100,000 people, whether it's in Britain or America or in China or India. The population of 100,000 people tends to produce so many centenarians. And this is being done at the moment throughout the planet. Certain remarkable things are emerging as centenarians increase extraordinarily in number, despite 2 world wars. Centenarianism favors men, not women. It's been said, quite rightly, that women outlive men everywhere. Well, they do, but not centenarians. If a man is surviving to vast old age, he more easily, becomes a centenarian, a super centenarian even, somebody who is above 110 years old. And this is a characteristic more favorable to men than to women. How more favorable? 33 men survive out of 100,000 into the centenarian age. And it is against 33 against 15 women. And so there are things going on, changes going on in the human body, which need further analyzing. And there is a specific body at the present looking into this matter in the country, the nation, the land, which is producing the most centenarians at this time. And of course, we're looking at other factors that contribute to this remarkable development. We have, for instance, the fact that islands seem to favor old age, the growing into vast old age. Islands seem to provide a geological or stimulating factor for continuing to live. And we all think of living on and on because it is part of our teaching, that in consciousness, it is at least in consciousness, possible to live on in a continuity of consciousness between lives. And reincarnation is part and parcel of the teachings of ancient wisdom. We know that certain mountains in the world have favored longevity. The Caucasus Mountains, of course, which we have embedded in our own mythology. Kilimanjaro, not much evidence of that now, but the standard, the quality of living in Africa is very poor indeed. But the Japanese one, which is? Fujiyama, yes. It is so beautifully constructed, the mountain, with its snow cap, that we don't hesitate to use it, not only as a symbol of whatever festival we are celebrating, but also because it has such symmetry about it. The symmetry of Fujiyama is remarkable because almost from any angle that you view it, moving even as you do that, it exudes energy. It gives up the energy of symmetry. And we have a new mathematics professor of Oxford or Cambridge, I can never remember which, who is now stimulating study of symmetry. The symmetry of the sun, the symmetry of geometrical shapes, because geometrical shapes were pointed to by Plato and the ancient Greek philosophers. For some reason, they weren't sure, nor are we sure. But one thing I do know, that if you wish to trace form, especially human form, if you wish to trace it back, you get to our usual astral, mental, higher mental, Atma Buddhi Manas, and then goes very, very blurred. And then we begin to understand that form is pre-existed by something else. It's information. Information gathered together produces a stimulus for the creation of form out of what? Mental energy? Who knows now at this stage? But that is the fact. That information, if you like, it changes into geometrical forms, the forms of Plato, before these different geometrical forms can tug, stimulate mental, higher mental matter, then lower mental matter into form and act as a stimulus for form. Another thing that is emerging in this analysis of old age is that only a quarter of the centenarians live in homes or institutions. 3/4 of them live independently, like to live independently of centenarians, like I am learning to live independently, assisted by a personal close staff. I'm still able to say what I like, do what I like, set an example of what I like, because that is a quality of centenarians. They tend to survive because they somehow maintain their independence. So there you are, it's another factor. Also, somehow or the other, centenarians are able to ward off Alzheimer's disease, the softening of the brain, the inability to get yourself together first thing in the morning and ready yourself for the various day's demands upon your activities. Very important indeed. Alzheimer's disease. It seems that centenarians, although they get different lesions in their brains as the result of trauma, of traumatic experiences. Nevertheless, these don't go on to Alzheimer's disease. In centenarians, it's somehow warded off, and they don't know how. Incredibly, the centenarians in their search for independence somehow maintain secret little habits, like smoking. Smoking has persisted in some centenarians for 50 years, often after 110. They are smoking 50 cigarettes a day, still well over 110 years of age. These are facts that are emerging. And also a third of the centenarians are drinkers. Drinkers in the sense that they have a regular drink. Well, I do too. I have a nightcap. And a nightcap is something that a lot of you will probably look towards. My friend Barbara Cartland, who lived to be 99 years old, just up the road here, she used to like a nightcap, and if it wasn't a nightcap, then it would be some sort of sleeping tablets. Which of the countries is producing the most centenarians? Well, you would be surprised to find that not surprised, perhaps, that it's an island. And it is, of all places, the island of Okinawa. Okinawa is producing vast numbers of centenarians for reasons unknown. Hazarded reasons, yes, but in fact, the real reason has escaped them. I'm going to present that reason to you today, and it will surprise you, or perhaps it won't surprise you, but it will have to be investigated by whom I know not. But it is an occult reason. There's Okinawa today. Notice the length of the island. It is strewn out. Does perhaps the length of the coastline have something to do with it? Does the possibility of eating seafoods have something to do with it? Or seaweed and the blowing of seaweed kelp, we call it, across the land, which assists somehow in this process. Okinawa. If we produce, not quite sure of these figures yet, 10 centenarians in every 100,000 here in Britain, and perhaps the United States 15, Okinawa produces something like 55 or 58 compared to the West. Very interesting indeed. Somehow or the other, the beings on Okinawa age slowly. They age slowly. You all have examples in your own life, I'm sure, of people who age rapidly, can age overnight. I had an elder sister who had a dark, eaten crop when she was a young lady, and the family was involved in a very severe accident, and she went white overnight. People can age through stress, trauma, and so on. This seems to be resisted in the island of Okinawa. And so diseases that normally kill the aged, dementia, and CVA, cardiovascular accidents, that's stroke. CVA, as well as coronary disease and cancers, usually kill the aged. But somehow or the other, centenarians, especially on Okinawa, resist this. How? Why? Can it be genetic, as they are immediately suspecting? Let's have a quick look at the genes and the DNA and so on, and the code. They haven't found it yet. One or two minor pointers to it, but not the genetics entirely, as it were. 900 of the Okinawans have been investigated, and the comment of Dr. Suzuki, a Japanese, for they are a Japanese island, the observation of Dr. Suzuki is that they were all lean, they were all youthful looking and energetic, and had very, very low rates of heart disease, and even things like stomach cancer, which kill in old age. They were a very healthy looking bunch. And so we must bear that in mind in looking at Okinawa. As it so happens, we call it synchronicity. And remember that synchronicity seems to tug at dimensions other than our version of space-time. Synchronicity seems to stir into action dimensions perhaps related to the first solar system, as Alice Bailey would have suggested. Dimensions that produce what we call non-locality, that when two things are entangled, they act as a single unit, and you change one, doesn't matter if it's a billion light years away, the other changes automatically faster than the speed of light. Such dimensions, which we head under quantum energies, such dimensions begin to operate when we experience synchronicity. And we tend not to do it until we're in our 40s or round about there, and we are aware that things coincide in our daily lives. You say, oh, good Lord. So all these things are connected by what force? Unknown at this stage, but it is suspected that it is other factors that are producing them. The Japanese have been very serious about longevity, not only as part of their culture for hundreds of years, but they've become very serious about it since the atomic bombs were dropped. And the atomic bombs caused them to look again at figures, and they religiously keep figures in every family in Japan and Okinawa, which show incontrovertibly, checked by officials, when they were born, how old they are, and what was the state of their health as they grew into old age, and if they maintained remarkable longevity. Interesting subject, because there's an occult factor behind it, which we're going to have a look at in a moment. The conclusions of Dr. Suzuki, so far, the conclusions are that a third of human life factors may be hereditary. Our ability to live into old age may have something to do with our genes, and we are able to do this. They have discovered a human leukocyte antigen. That means white cells of the blood, which are terribly important in inflammation, are somehow boosted by this factor. They call it HL, human leukocyte antigen. I'd suggest these names because it's high time, especially if you're going into middle age and old age, for you to have your own research problems. Part of the difficulty, for instance, of the Association of Research and Enlightenment, which was the Edgar Cayce Foundation in America, a huge organization with millions, their problem was that it was all devotion and all idealism, and they had great difficulty in reminding their numerous members that it was also a research organization, hence their interest in Egypt and the ancient history of Egypt and the Atlantean. everybody is surprised and delighted that it should be Okinawa. But Douglas Baker has looked at it, and he has seen last night on television, just by chance, synchronicity, there was a program on Okinawa. And the program showed that 150,000 civilians on Okinawa were killed or died or committed suicide in World War II. Equally so, I think there were nearly 100,000 Japanese soldiers died on the island in the fight out with the Americans, and also 12,000 Americans themselves were killed on Okinawa, a very important factor. So let us get on to this astounding discovery that we have, that certain countries stand out in the number of old-aged people that live for some unaccountable reason, and Okinawa heads the list. 58 per 100,000. 58, and Japan, similar, but not quite. Japan is a much larger island than Okinawa, and a large number of young men were killed on the island as well as civilians. Where else do we have this characteristic showing in the world? Let me point to another one. France, 32 per 100,000. France. Hawaii, right over there on the left, another good number, what is it, 20? But these two in particular, Okinawa and Italy, what coincides with those two countries? Very, very heavy losses of life in France, Battle of the Somme, as well as the recent World War II, and very heavy loss of life on Okinawa, and very heavy loss of life, including civilians, of course, in Japan with 2 atomic bombs. And the Japanese are watching very carefully to see whether they're, all right, I'm making this up as part of that, but it's a fact, that maybe people killed by atomic radiation may die less heavily than people who are killed or die of disease and other conditions. What does that suggest? It brings into consideration the fact of reincarnation. It is the esoteric teaching if a young man of 18, 19, 20, 25 is killed in a car accident. You had one here last Saturday, his brother. If somebody is killed in an accident, they have a very vivid, live, strong, active, continuously conscious astral body, even after death, which hovers around. If it has benign circumstances, like a good home to return to, it will tend to gravitate to that area. But if they are war victims, especially if they are young soldiers, the psychological reaction of young soldiers, especially British and probably French, the attitude of young soldiers when they are killed and they have vibrant astral bodies is for them to return to wherever their comrades were. They don't want to go back home. The home is often crusty. The home is often boarding school-like. They want to be with their buddies after they're dead. And in Okinawa, this was also true. They wanted to be with their buddies on Okinawa. The fighting lasted 3 weeks, if I remember. And what is the suggestion that I'm making here? The suggestion is that they do return to such circumstances, and over the next 30, 40 years will have the opportunity to occupy young bodies coming into incarnation on Okinawa or Japan or France, where there were millions died in wars. And what is it producing? It is producing centenarians in large numbers in both Okinawa and France. 58 in Okinawa per 100,000, 32 in France, 28 in Japan. Compared to the rest of the world, United Kingdom, 15, but of course we had a few casualties in England, not too many. And another inexplicable, outstanding one was Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia produces 23 centenarians per 100,000. But France and Okinawa stand out. And the answer to that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I have said, that the aged of Okinawa, from quite an early age perhaps, have been bolstered by occupation of a dead soldier, young one, and this somehow or the other braces from the emotional and mental level, braces the physical body of a new incarnation. A very challenging matter. It'll take time before it's picked up, but if you get a few centenarians who are esoterically inclined and they are confirming this kind of finding, like myself, for instance, we'll see what that does to public opinion. Who is affronted by such a suggestion? That reincarnation of young men with active astral bodies, the Germans called them doppelgangers, and they were used to doppelgangers, the idea of the doppelganger, the astral body finding its reincarnation and living close to it as a doppelganger, feeding itself into the newly incarnated form. Even if the form is taken over, and the best age for a form to be taken over is about age 8. And that work has come to us, of course, by an authority on the subject, Dr. Ian Stevenson, who has done immense research into such subjects as the one I'm giving you, but never has it ever been suggested that there is some set of factors emerging to show that where there has been heavy war casualties, body bags, that's how I think of them, because in World War II they counted the success of the campaigns on the Western Front, landing in Germany, in terms of how successful was it? 23,000 body bags today. Yesterday it was 20,000 body bags. Tomorrow we're expecting a big fight, and it'll probably be over 30,000 body bags. Body bag? What is a body bag? It's a zip-up. It means you can put the dead body into a zip-up, and the body will lie around. It'll be shipped back to America or wherever, the place of birth. The body bag becomes an essential aspect of the astral world. The body being retained within a body bag in war can be likened to the sarcophagus containing the pharaoh during the pharaonic reign in Egypt, and a retention to the body bag remains. Even though the astral body escapes, of course, from its body bag, the body bag still retains certain information. And if you were able to look into the astral world, you could see tremendously changed conditions there today, where you have a population of 7 billion on the earth, producing enormous numbers of astral bodies under normal circumstances. But amongst them are also the beings that are killed, don't die, but are killed. And in the astral world, there are beings there, quite highly motivated, who clear up the astral world, like there are do-gooders on the earth who try and clear up conditions here that are ugly or wasteful or untidy. You're not thinking enough. You're in a world that's changing vastly and rapidly, and you're not adapting your thinking to understand the impact not just of patriarchism and what it's going to do, especially to the East, the West, as well as parts of the East, and the astral world that is receiving the astral bodies of 7 billion people daily, at night when they dream and have out-of-body experience, but also those who die and don't get back into their physical bodies. Yes, Doug Allen.
The point you were making about the people who were killed with the atom bomb blast in Japan, was there a difference in what was happening to them as to the soldiers?
I'm only surmising that.
Okay.
The attention of Japan, and indeed the whole world, was upon the atomic bombs, which saved 1 million American lives, but at the same time killed, directly or indirectly, 1 million Japanese. And subsequent evidence through the years, especially the atomic accidents which occurred in America at some...
3 Mile Island?
Correct. Who was that?
Me, Richard.
Very good, thank you. That accident, and also the Japanese and the Russian accident, indicates that exposure to radiation from nuclear fission did not have quite the damaging effect that it was expected to have. Plants recovered quickly. Islands where there had been atomic explosions soon were thriving with life again. And I'm suggesting now that perhaps a radiatory death may produce a lighter form of death than the heavy form of death like cancer that practically devours everything in the living cells of the body. That's what I meant. That was that one. It's a vastly interesting subject, and it can bring alive again reincarnation, which has gone cold. Reincarnation has gone cold because the world has been exposed to terrible tragedies. Suddenly we are aware that thousands of people can be killed in an earthquake. Thousands of men can die in the Battle of the Somme. Thousands of this, thousands of that different tribe or so-and-so. and we become aware of it because we have gained inadvertently and indirectly planetary clairvoyance. The little gadgets that we can screw to ourselves, the television and the 8 o'clock news or whatever it is, gives us the ability to see things going on at a distance. And whether you like it or not, the brain, which is the controller and director of such experience, inevitably in some part, the brain has experienced clairvoyance, never matter what a kind of device or gizmo has produced the clairvoyance, the brain has seen it. We are human. We have brains that are constantly being adapted to different conditions, electricity, radio, and so on and so on and so on. Very interesting subject. And new, brand new. Never posited in my knowledge in Theosophy before. And very real, because here you have it. Okinawa, incontrovertibly, the worst Pacific battle with the most killed, and where you have the highest amount of longevity, centenarians. 58 per 100,000 compared with Britain and America around about 10 or 15. In America, what occurred in America when it had its civil war, they lost 500,000 men in the American Civil War, and there must have been repercussions thereafter. But what I do know is that very shortly after, there was a sudden spurt of spiritualism in America, just after the Civil War, which may have been this sort of thing related in a different way. Questions? Yes, Richard.
Yeah, you're suggesting that the high rate of centenarianism in Japan is attributed to losses in war. If that's the case,
dead men coming back and demanding to be with their cobbers, or where their cobbers had been, where they had met them, and wanting to continue there, and what else to do but to enjoy, perhaps in the dream state, who knows, enjoy part of the life of what would become a new incarnation, especially if it's a susceptible human, like an 8-year-old child, as Dr. Ian Stevenson discovered. That is what the Indian reincarnations seem to show, that many, many Indian children had memories of the previous life. And Ian Stevenson you must put your reading together and see all sorts of implications to it. I have noted down through the years some comments which I have to make about longevity on Okinawa. There is so much information regarding this subject and evidence to back it that I will be forced to read some of it in order not to miss detail. The enthusiasm of the American soldiers landing on Okinawa was unquestionable. They were young, vibrant with emotional energy, ready to give their lives if necessary. In esoteric parlance, we call this aspiration. The aspiration of young Allied soldiers ready to rid humanity of this pest of fascism. The pest of fascism, whether it was German or Italian or even Japanese. This aspiration supercharges the astral or emotional body. It does it to such an extent that even if and when war and death becomes the ultimate conclusion of the life of the young soldier, there will still be aspiration enough to urge the young man now into a doppelganger state. His residual astral form will desire to return to the scene of his recent death, fighting for an aspirational cause this time, if nothing else. It is this kind of highly charged, almost spiritual fanaticism that conveys a kind of transcendental life force, a life force that immediately after destruction of the physical body will seek a new incarnation. This carryover, the carryover of aspiration, bears the life force during the intervening period between death of the physical body and its transitions into ethereal states. It is this aspirational force that attracts the dead soldier towards another reincarnation. We have here in Okinawa the obvious route for the resurgence of this life force within the young soldier, a life force anchored to the scenes immediately which preceded his death, such as in the conquering of Okinawa. Only a few retain this extraordinary facility for rebirth, due to the degree of their aspiration, an almost fanatical urge to continue with their good intentions. Plato would have called it the urge towards truth, towards the beauty of self-sacrifice, and the justice of karma that makes the dead soldier activate the driving force of his rebirth. Okinawa presented such conditions in which some 10,000 or more American boys paid the supreme sacrifice for their patriotism. Dying for their country was dying for mankind in a just war. One must presume that the same applies to the Japanese kamikaze. No better cause célèbre could exist than that they would come back, they, the few, who were so embedded in the love of their country, that they would come back with just aspiration to the comrades they had left in the crisis of that war situation. And so we presume that death is a leveler, because Japanese soldiers fighting and dying under almost similar circumstances contributed to the subsequent longevity of the Okinawan children. Dead soldiers being reborn, thereby incarnating into them, so research shows, when the child is about the age of 8, it can accept more easily an overshadowing, incarnating entity at that time. It is therefore not surprising that there would have been rebirth both of Japanese soldiers as well as those of American origin at the place of their demise, which was Okinawa. The inordinate desires of the very elderly Okinawans to continue with their alcoholic inhibitions and their smoking, as statistics show, were retained by both American and Japanese dying in battle and reincarnating there on Okinawa. What comes to mind also is the suicide of civilian inhabitants of Okinawa, jumping over the precipices. Theirs was a different kind of intention, a negative one of wanting to end it all, rather than to aspire to the higher service of humanity in some great cause. This is not degrading suicide itself, but points out the subtle difference between the certain death of a soldier who goes into battle patriotically to offer his life for his country, and the suicide of civilians who, for some reason or the other, throw their lives away with no intention ever of returning to such a disastrous state of affairs in their current lives on earth. This brings into the same framework the matter of suicide bombers, who will kill themselves and even the innocent people around them for a fruitless cause, and with an element of selfishness that is inexplicable to the civilized mind. All these various factors would have hovered around the island of Okinawa for a considerable time after the war, after the battles that had been fought there, enabling a climate suitable for the reincarnatory process to become more likely. The extraordinary coincidence of longevity, both on the island of Okinawa and in France, is startling. And for anyone au fait with esoteric evidence and laws governing the process of rebirth, this revealing information offers hope that a useful understanding of the whole process might enable us to overcome some of the turbulence that we as civilizations encounter when young people incurably ill or damaged in accidents feel the necessity of ending their lives in what has been loosely termed euthanasia.